Hello, my name is Ryan Lowry, and for my oral report, I decided to share with you the story of one of America's founding fathers of freedom of speech. That man is John Peter Zenger. The freedom of press has not always been a given right to everyone in America. Like every other right that us Americans have fought for, there have been significant moments along the way that have led to freedom as we know it. The trial of John Peter Zenger was the first major judicial decision involving the freedom of the press in the colonial time. Author Alan Dershowitz said in his book, America on Trial, the trial and acquittal of publisher John Peter Zenger in 1735 has become part of the legend of American freedom of speech. Even though some recent historians have downplayed the actual significance of the event in transforming the law of press freedom, it is impossible to overestimate the impact of American attitudes toward speech and censorship. In the year 1732, William Cosby was appointed the mayor of New York. At the time, this would not be considered a landmark event, but the events that ensued because of his appointment would help shape freedom of expression in America for years to come. William Cosby's appointment was no surprise, as he had many ties to many important people in England. Not only was he a former general of the Royal Irish Army, but he was also a close friend of the English nobleman, the Duke of Newcastle. He also had experience of being a governor. His past job had been governor of Minorca. When he was appointed the mayor of New York, many of the citizens were delighted with the decision because Cosby was an important figure in securing an appeal of a sugar bill that was detrimental to the interests of the colonial people. At the beginning of his reign, he was also very friendly and welcoming of the colonial people. The people believed that he was an honest man and not like many of the other corrupt leaders they had dealt with in the past. This feeling of glee was not a feeling that would remain, though. At the time, the citizens voted to allow Governor Cosby an annual salary of £1,500, which is what they found fair. Also, to show their appreciation for repealing the sugar bill, they allotted Cosby a bonus of £750. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Lewis Morris, informed Governor Cosby of the citizens' opinion, and the governor became outraged. Cosby felt as if this sum was far too low of a salary for him. Morris, a person of the people, returned to the New York General Assembly and informed the member of Cosby's attitude. The citizens felt upset, but this was only the first rift in the relationship between the people and Governor Cosby. Prior to William's appointment as governor, Rip Van Dam was voted by the people as acting governor. As a result of the salary that he deemed too low, Cosby demanded that Van Dam pay him back half of Van Dam's salary for the past year. Cosby had obtained a letter from the king that he believed proved he was allowed to ask this. Rip Van Dam refused to pay him and claimed that Cosby had misread the king's letter. Cosby opted to take Van Dam to court, but Lewis Morris refused to allow the trial the way that Cosby preferred it. Morris asked printer John Peter Zenger to print the speech for the public to see it. Cosby then openly accused Morris of lacking integrity. This tiff hurt Cosby in the eye of the people yet again. To make matters worse, Cosby actually stripped Morris of his title and all his judicial powers and replaced him with one of his best friends, James Delancey. Not much is known about John Peter Zenger's early life, but his past is what helped shape him into an American free speech founder. The Zenger family was forced out of their home by the French in 1710 and set sail for America. John Peter Zenger was only 13 at the time and was joined by his father, his mother, his brother, and his younger sister. Later that year, they landed safely at the port of New York and began to start a new chapter of their life. Coming from a relatively poor family, John Peter Zenger was signed on as an apprenticeship to William Buford, who was the only printer in New York at the time. He ran a paper entitled The Gazette. Prior to working in New York, Bradford was a printer in Philadelphia, but left the city after a couple of problems with political leaders arose and they seized his printing press. Zenger would continue his apprenticeship for a number of years before finally moving on with his own life. John Peter Zenger opted to move to Chestertown, Maryland, and set up his own printing press. While there, he got married and had a son. Sadly, his wife passed away shortly after giving birth to their son in 1726, and Zenger decided to make a move back to New York and to continue to work with Bradford on the Gazette. After working with Bradford for years, Zenger had an itch to begin his own newspaper and began printing the Journal, which is sometimes referred to as the New York Journal. The Journal became a place for revolutionists to attempt to expose the corruption of their English rulers. Zenger was not a very educated man, so it is believed that many other people actually wrote most of the articles and editorials. Among the men connected with the journal are Lewis Morris, his son Lewis Morris Jr., Rip Van Dam, and many other intellectuals at the time. The only name that ever appeared on the paper, though, was John Peter Zenger, so he was given and took all the blame. Governor Cosby was not pleased at all to learn that a public newspaper, which was very popular at the time, was campaigning against him and his policy. The journal accused the governor of many actions which were deemed violations of the rules by which the governor was bound. Cosby then decided to write the king himself and explain to him the maliciousness of the journal's content. Cosby also decided to overtake William Bradford's Gazette and replace Bradford with another close friend of his, Francis Harrison. Soon after this happened, the Gazette began to publish many articles singing the greatness of Cosby and his policies. An article stated, "Cosby, the mild, the happy, the good, and the great, the strongest guard of our little state." A true rivalry developed between the two publications, and they began to write articles downplaying each other's beliefs. The journal had the community's favor, though, because all of their contributors were much respected men, unlike Cosby and Harrison. Even with the wild popularity of the journal, it could not change the fact that Cosby was still governor and had the law in the palm of his hand. In October 1734, Chief Justice James Delancey, the Cosby crony, brought an indictment to the grand jury against John Peter Zenger. Delancey claimed that Zenger's content in the journal was libel. Delancey said sometimes heavy, half-witted men get a knack of rhyming, but it is time to break them of it when they grow abusive, insolent, and mischievous with it. A warrant for the arrest for John Peter Zenger was granted. The warrant read, It is an order that the sheriff for the city of New York do forthwith take and apprehend John Peter Zenger for printing and publishing several seditious libels dispersed throughout his journals or newspapers, entitled the New York Journal, as having in them many things tending to raise factions among the people of this province, inflaming their minds with the contempt of his Majesty's government, and greatly disturbing the peace thereof. And upon taking the said John Peter Zenger, to commit him to prison or common jail of the said city and country. On November 17, 1734, Zenger was taken into custody of the sheriff. He was not allowed to see his wife, children, friends, or lawyers, and refused to take a pencil and pen, as he feared, though, it would be used against him in trial. The journal was set to be printed and distributed the next day, on November 18th, but missed its publication for the first time since its inception. However, the journal was distributed on November 19th and told the story of his arrest and imprisonment. It is believed that his wife did most of the printing while he was incarcerated. Zenger awaited his trial for 8 months in jail. Cosby, following his reputation, handpicked the judges that would preside over the trial, but he was not allowed to pick the jurors. One of the judges was Chief Justice Delancey. In his book America on Trial, Inside the Legal Battles That Transformed Our Nation, author Alan Dershowitz said, "The Chief Justice publicly announced that if a jury found Zenger not guilty, they would be perjured. The governor and his men figured they had this case won before it already began. John Peter Zenger, though, and his lawyer, Andrew Hamilton, did not cave in so easy. During the trial, Zenger claimed to have written and published all the articles in the journal. Many believe that this was a confession of libel, but Hamilton did not see it that way. Hamilton argued that Zenger's articles were not libelous because even if they were slanderous in use, all statements were based on fact. Hamilton appealed to the jurors of the common people and won them over. The trial of John Peter Zenger was a landmark in the development of common law protection for freedom of speech. His lawyer, Anthony Hamilton, established the precedent that a statement, even if deemed defamatory, is not libelous if it can be proven true. It was the first important victory for freedom of the press in Britain's North American colonies. After the jury's verdict, British governors were reluctant to charge American printers with seditious libel. They realized that colonial juries would likely refuse to convict anyone for publishing criticism of royal officials. Because of this, the colonial press became more open and free. During the years leading up to the American Revolution, printers published attacks on British authorities as well as calls for independence. The Zenger trial influenced the attitudes of future generations of colonial Americans. After independence from Great Britain was won, the first United States Congress included guarantees of a free press in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. This verdict has become a key consideration in libel cases since that time.